Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms, and these are Charter Moms Chats. And today we have a special guest, Kathryn Kennedy, and we're going to talk about mental health, wellness, especially for educators, but also for caregivers, because we know a lot of our audience includes both. So, but let me introduce Kathryn. So she has two primary passions that she's been cultivating over the past 15 plus years. On the mental health side, she's the founder and executive director of Wellness for Educators, and we're going to learn more about that today. And then on the digital and online learning side, she created an education consulting firm called Consult for Ed Group. So as you can imagine, she's been very busy for the past few years as schools adopted virtual learning out of necessity. But she's learned a lot of really important lessons from that. I want to recommend to everybody, click on the link in the description of the video, and that will take you to the guest blog post that Kathryn created that's at sachartermoms.com. It's the top post on sachartermoms.com today. We've shared it on all our social media channels. So I really encourage you to check out that post. It's got lots of great links, but I'm really excited to get to have a conversation with Kathryn about the content that's in the post, because she has this amazing expertise, and I think it's very relevant for where teachers are at right now and also where parents and caregivers are at.
Thank you so much for having me here, Inga. I'm really grateful to be here and to be part of your community.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I guess first of all, I want people to be aware of wellness for educators. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the mission and vision of wellness for educators, and also please mention your book as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We were actually founded in the state of Maine, where I used to live. I now live in right outside of Ithaca, New York. But we are a nonprofit, and we're invested in and passionate about creating school-wide wellness through mind-body education and practices. And this is not only for school leaders and educators, but it's also for students and parents and caregivers or guardians. And the book really stems from all of the work that we've been doing. It's called The Mind Body Connection for Educators, and it's supposed to be coming out within the next week or so. So, yeah, definitely check out Barnes and Noble. We're also on Porchlight and Amazon.
That's wonderful. So Kathryn, I wanted to ask you, and you do a great job describing this in your blog post, but if you could kind of roll the clock back to like 2018, 2019, so even before the pandemic, you're noticing patterns in educator burnout. So what kind of projects were you working on back then to address that issue?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you should ask this question because I go back to this and always think like it wasn't supposed to be this big. When I started, it was supposed to be wicked small. I had just jumped off into education consulting from a lot of director of research positions that I had held in nonprofits around online and digital learning, which is my other love, as you know, as you mentioned. And so but I did want to do that connection with mental health and wellness because I was on my own personal journey for my own mental health and well-being. And so with that, it was like we wanted to start small. So we did like a wellness library with 3 to 5 minute practices that were mind body practices that helped to heal stress and prolonged stress and trauma. And so we did wellness library. And then I was like, oh, I'd really like to do some more things. And, started cultivating the network for webinars and podcasts. And we also did book studies to really talk about that mind body connection and why it's so important to the healing process as well as to our learning processes as well.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so interesting because like you were noticing these patterns and how to address it. And I want to mention to folks like so I guess my first experience with your story. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So our team member Laura is a great reader. She's on Instagram at Books and Discoveries, and she's always posting book reviews. So she's a great reader. She's a great explainer and sharer of these great ideas. She chose to go to your session at the National Charter Schools Conference in DC last summer, and then Laura came out of that session and was just so enthusiastic and just raving about how powerful your story was. And Laura said, "Here, listen to this." So I listened to your podcast sharing your story. You mentioned like your mental health journey, and I mean, just your story is very dramatic, but I think everybody can relate to and have experiences that they've had in their life that maybe like their memory doesn't add up, and and just having to kind of go back and process that. So like you've experienced this in a really significant way, and I don't want to spoil anything. There's a link to it in kind of the bibliography of the blog post. So everybody go to the link in the description, click on the blog post, read it, and then find that link to that podcast where Kathryn tells her story. I really encourage everybody to read it. Very, very relatable and very, very vulnerable. So I understand how, with that kind of background and doing that kind of work for yourself, like you have so much compassion for educators and wanting to help them, and also like really, really testing, like, okay, what is really going to make a difference for people? And I think that's where like these movement exercises that you were talking about are so significant, right? And so anyway, that's kind of the groundwork of what was happening before the pandemic hit, and then all of a sudden, just the stressful experiences just become overwhelming, right?
Yeah, and honestly, like at the start of the pandemic, obviously nobody was ready for that. It was, as think people are so tired of talking about the unprecedented nature of it. Yes, it was unprecedented for sure. And so like at that time, like I said, Wellness for Educators was wicked small, and we were planning on keeping it that way, like right ahead of the pandemic. But then all of a sudden, I saw what was happening. Having had my background in online and digital learning, I was pulled into state level, shifts from, traditional to online spaces. I was pulled into curriculum organizations and companies that wanted to shift all of their professional development for teachers online. I was also brought into some other projects where I was working with schools and districts to really understand, okay, how do we communicate this to parents and caregivers, and how do we communicate this to the community, and how do we, connect with other people and organizations that we typically do when we're in a traditional, face-to-face space. So it was a lot of like this complete chaos and also just this like constant go. And we'll get into that like constant go mode later and what that does for our bodies and our minds. But that consult for ed side, my consulting space was like crazy through the roof. And I was at the same time, I was really trying to kind of push like this idea that we really need to concentrate on mental health and well-being right now. This was in 2020. And I was like, everybody's in go mode. And I'm like, we really need to do something about this right now. And, or else it's not going to be good in a year or two. And, one of the states that I was working with, they were pushing SEL, and SEL is wonderful, yes, but it is a smaller part of the larger umbrella of mental health and well-being. And so, I encourage them, please, please put some mental health and well-being pieces into. And they were like, I don't think it's really necessary. SEL is going to do everything, that we need right now. I'm like, yep, right now. But, fast forward 2 years, it might not be the case that was enough. But, again, we were all doing the best that we could where we were at the time. And so it was really hard for me to, be that, please, like, it's like when you like Chicken Little, like, it's like the sky is falling, the sky is falling, nobody wants to listen. And then it was like, okay, I'm not the I told you so type. So it's just kind of like we are here where we are, and like what can we do to support educators, parents and caregivers, and students where we are right now. And I think that's again where we are right now, is really trying to support as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. So in 2020, the pandemic starts. People are experiencing so much stress and stressful experiences that they've for the most part have never been. And like you said, being in go mode all the time, like being in like a fight or flight, elevated state for a long period of time, and then experiencing burnout. And from your research and from your own experiences that there are long-term consequences to staying in that state for too long. But and social emotional learning it's good stuff, but there's other pieces to mental health and wellness than that. And people weren't necessarily receptive to hearing that because everyone felt like they were just pedaling as fast as they could. So then the next part of the inquiry is like, like people start reporting feeling numb, right? And there's been research about ACEs, right? And I know I'm throwing out a lot of stuff anyway, but this, like, I feel like this is really well, and like the title of your piece is that, we need to have, like it's not, there's no quick fix. It's more of like a system level approach, right? So I think this is really like the heart of like the point you're trying to make. I mean, I think a lot of people have said, oh, mental health is an issue, but what you're saying is it's the system level response is how we're actually going to make a difference.
Yeah, and I think to your point about like that being in go mode, parents and caregivers were learning a whole new way of supporting their children, and maybe even playing a larger role in that support of their children than they were previously, on top of everything else that you all have to do, right? And then teachers and parent or and school leaders were learning new ways of teaching, new ways of leading, but they were also serving as community spaces. If they weren't already doing that pre-pandemic, they were having to learn and to partner in different ways. So there's just a lot going on. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot of is that idea of the intersection of prolonged stress, trauma, and learning, and why this is so important. Trauma, the way we think of it, is anything that really pushes us outside of our ability to cope. And that comes from Dr. Peter Levine, who I talked about in the article. He's a trauma expert, and he talks about the space in which we are able to cope as our quote unquote window of tolerance. And that is how much stress we are able to tolerate until we are pushed outside of that window into our inability to cope. So when we experience trauma and prolonged stress, and we don't take the time to heal it, our bodies and minds store it, and we can cause our nervous systems to really go into those unregulated spaces, such as fight or flight or fawn responses or freeze responses, like your numbing, what mentioned numbing. And brain research shows that in those spaces, no new learning can take place. And so it affects our work with others, which relates to the SEL part, which we talked about. So if we're not working our way through that healing process, it really, we can't learn in the most effective and meaningful ways. And so the way that we think about like the whole system approach is that we need safety and connections. And if you think about like what happened during the pandemic and even pre-pandemic, in some cases, there might be a lack of safety, right? There is a lack of connections and community when we are technically isolated, in those spaces. And so I guess one of the things that I also think about is that go mode. And one of our leaders, our educational leaders, he said something that was so poignant to me. It was, it's lonely at the top. And it was like he was trying to care so much for everybody around him that he just said, I went numb and I didn't realize that trauma was happening to me, or it was within me. Like I just was just totally in go mode. And I think we're all familiar with that notion, or saying that we can push through and go back to normal. And I think that sort of sentiment really circulated a lot during the pandemic, and especially towards like what the pseudo end. But we can't push through or go back to normal, because when we do these things, we are actively suppressing these trauma or prolonged stress experiences, which, as the ACEs study had brought that up, shows they only come back to us later on in life, in physical and mental ailments. And I love Tori Press's or at Revelatory, her illustration of like us burying, burying our issues, and then all of a sudden they start growing up around us. She's on Instagram at Revelatory. Thanks for sharing that. She's a great friend of mine, and this is exactly the illustration of what we talk about when we suppress our trauma and prolonged stress instead of taking action to heal it. Um, so those body-based healing practices are really vitally important in understanding that connection with our learning processes and how it affects that, and also how it affects our relationships with others and our, interactions in our learning spaces, I think is really important. Um, and to that point, like that system level approach is really important. So I'll talk a little bit, if you're okay with this, about the percentages of educators that we're seeing leaving the field, and how that is really concerning for us. So there is a lot of emphasis, I think, in the field about educators, not just educators, actually anybody that you talk to, like needing to take care of themselves, right? So our board chair, her name's Dr. Mehruji Duni, and she is out of space in Texas, actually, at the Momentous Institute. She is a licensed psychologist. She's amazing. If you don't know her, definitely look her up. And she shared stats recently at one of our board meetings of the 2021 RAND Corporation study. And this study was focused on the state of the US teacher, and research revealed that 1 in 4 teachers indicated that they were likely to leave the profession by the end of the year. And that is up from 1 in 6 that was pre-pandemic numbers. So a quarter of teachers in 2021 were saying that they were ready to leave the field. Many educators are saying that this year, 2022-23, has been hardest that they've ever had to face. So it's not just the ones who have already left, but also the ones who are staying are stressed even more so now because of that. And 50% of teachers who self-identified as Black or African American reported they were likely to leave. 75% of teachers report that they had frequent job-related stress, and that's up 61% since pre-pandemic. So that's a huge shift that we're seeing in the field. And about 20% of teachers report not coping well with that stress. And 20% of them are saying that they don't even know how to cope with it. And about 50% are feeling burned out. And we know that burnout, leads to significant symptoms of mental and physical health stresses later on. And so these statistics aren't something that we can ignore. And while self-care can be a remedy for stress and burnout, self-care cannot be the one and only solution for what has become a systemic problem. And honestly, this is not just for the education field, this is all of us. We can't just do self-care. Like, this is like a lot of system level issues that need to be changed in order for us to be better supported. So the stress that's being experienced by our educators is being experienced not only on an individual level, but it's also seen as a system level issue. And talking about self-care really puts the onus on the individual and completely ignores the system issues that have led us to these issues. And so one of my teachers, Dr. Albert Wong, he's a somatic psychotherapist, and he told us during one of our sessions, challenges within communities or systems need interventions at the level of communities or systems. So there needs to be that awareness of those challenges, and then an action to actually alleviate those challenges.
Yeah, and that's I'm so happy that you're contributing this post to us and having this conversation, because the SA Turner Moms missions, we're trying to put information out there so that individual caregivers or teachers, that they can problem solve in their own sphere, right? The way, like self-care, and social emotional learning, like those are good things. They help, and we want families to, find schools that are the right fit for their children, that can help their particular family, but it's important to have systems level change, right? Like, so like if we have a range of school options, especially high quality school options, then like our hope is to elevate the quality of education across San Antonio and have a more educated workforce in the future, have a more prosperous and more fulfilled group of people in San Antonio, right? Like, so we're trying to contribute to that. And what you're talking about is like there's these particular like signs that people may notice about themselves, right? That like feeling numb, or if they've been telling themselves for 3 years, just push through, just push through. And but that's just burying the trauma. And we know because of the ACEs study that it will affect our physical health. And there's a point where you just can't push through anymore, right? It doesn't work. You have, and whether the better way is to recognize that in ourselves, or have a close friend or family member say, hey, I think you need to take care of yourself. But sometimes it catches us off guard, right? Like having, like a health breakdown, and then going, oh, wait a minute, like, okay, this is really serious. I have to change what I'm doing.
Yeah, for sure. That is exactly actually my whole life story was that. Like, I ignored the heck out of everything that had happened to me. And some of it I didn't know until later on because it was like pre-verbal, some of the stuff that had happened to me as a child. And so, it took a while for everything to just come back to me and be told to me. And then it was like all of a sudden, I can't escape it anymore and I can't ignore this anymore. And here we are. And I did. I ended up having a nervous breakdown in my 30s, and it was like a huge wake up call. And I had never had panic attacks before. All of these different things started happening to me, and and I know Laura, during our session, I had mentioned that I also, similar to the ACEs study, like I had, my number for ACEs is 7, and so I could tell. I told everybody that one of my physical ailments ended up being an autoimmune disorder, and so it was like these things really contributed to me just trying to push through and not deal and just like ignore or suppress what was happening within me. And it did affect me, but at the same time, that wake up call actually made me even more intrigued by the fact that at that time, like, I could not learn. I stopped learning. I stopped my ability to learn. I was in the middle of my PhD program. I had to take a leave of absence for like 3 or 4 months, and I could not do anything. And so I just had to kind of build myself back up in order for me to be able to start learning again. But as scary as that process was, it was also, obviously, as an educator, very intriguing to me because I was like, I just completely went offline, no pun intended, and I don't understand why, right? So, like, let me figure out, my inner toddler was like, okay, I want to know all of the things. Like, why did this happen? And so that's what I ended up doing, is just like this constant need to understand, like, why did this happen? And then, on the healing side, when I started doing the mind body practices, because I had been in 35 years of cognitive behavioral therapy, which was great, it helped, but it didn't take me to that next level healing. And until I started doing those types of healing processes in the mind body connection, bodily type of healing spaces, that took me to that whole next level of learning about what happened to me, and also having that compassion, like building that compassion up for the people who were in my life at the time of everything happening. So all that to say, I think as traumatic of an experience it was to like just completely go offline, it was also like basically the story of like how we became wellness for educators, and the why I was so compelled to share this with other educators, because I had heard the story over and over again as a qualitative researcher about how stressed educators were pre-pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, forget about it. Like, this is just like something's got to
Yeah.
give,
Yeah.
and I want to help, and I want other people to help. And so Wellness for Educators has brought together a bunch of licensed mental health professionals, and a lot of them are funnily from Texas, because one of our board members, our chair of our board, is actually in Texas, so she's referred a lot of Texans to our staff of contractors, and so we're just grateful for the ability to be able to share the mind body education and the mental health side of things, but then also the somatic or mind body practices as well.
Yeah, I think that's like, you know, I mean, I feel like, yeah, like we're coming up on 3 years of talking about this situation, but we're beyond the point of just making observations or analyzing it. But and I think what's so helpful about your post, and I'm really excited to look at your book, is that you're offering solutions, and these are research based. It's based on like your life story, your curiosity, your mentors and teachers, your colleagues in Wellness for Educators, of like, okay, what's going to make a difference at a systems level, and then for individuals, like, just realizing, right, that like therapy has its place, and cognitive behavioral therapy is life changing. But if you really want to rebuild that, some of these practices, like, the movements and stuff that people can do can make a tremendous difference. People just have to, like, maybe let down their skepticism, just try, like, it, the videos are there, right? The audio, the media is there. Just try it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too about it is like the the practices are not that difficult, and they're not that long. And I think the misperception is like, oh my God, I've got all this trauma and stress, like it's going to take me forever, like a wicked long time to heal. And to be completely honest, I was only doing these practices for, I would say like 1 to 2 months before I started feeling much differently, feeling better. Physically and mentally, for that matter. And I think, you know, it doesn't have to be yoga. Like if your practices don't really you don't want to go the yoga route, or you don't want to go the meditation route, there are science-based backing for those practices. However, things like art, I can tell you right now, like art and music, singing, breathing, dancing, all of these creative based, but also like just what we do on a daily basis, done a little bit differently in order to stimulate what we call the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is something that hits on every single major um, organ in our body, and it's tied to our nervous system. So as soon as we start feeling stress, our vagus nerve is like, hey, body, you need to be stressed too. And so what you can do is you can actually work with your vagus nerve through things like humming. You can work with your vagus nerve with deep breathing, or different types of breathing techniques that we share on the website. You can also do it through um, somatic, less so with the vagus nerve, but like with somatic or mind body intentional practices, like using your five senses. So to ground yourself. So, like, what are 3 things that I can touch around me? I have my cell phone here. So, like, and the back of it's nice and soft. So it's like, I touch my cell phone, I touch my earbud things, I touch my lipstick or my chapstick, like, or what can I see? Like, if there's like trees outside, or there might be snow or a bird, or what can I hear? I can hear the bird chirping. So, like, connecting to things around us can be really grounding as well, especially if they are calming things. So there are a bunch of different practices that you can definitely do. But I do want to say that, like, especially if you're a school, or if you're at home and you don't have the resources to go to any of these mind body places to practice, say like a yoga studio, or qigong, which is a traditional Chinese medicine type of space with like tai chi and things like that. If you don't have the resources to do that, um, coloring, artwork, things like that. Like I said, singing. Even if you don't sing, if you don't feel like you sing well, like I feel like I don't sing well, doesn't matter. Any kind of vocal work can help to stimulate the vagus nerve, but it also works with our pituitary gland and our pineal gland in our nervous system, which are located up here in our good old brain.
I feel like like, a lot of us, like, I mean, people in like educators and myself, like, being kind of achievement oriented people, like we, think of like our mind is this abstract thing and it's sort of our body sort of carries it around, but we don't think about how connected they are. And I think just being more humble about the fact that like our brain, in order to take good care of our brain, we have to take good care of our body and make sure that they're well integrated with each other. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a one particular type of practice, but you need a practice, and you need to just be open to it, and not just say, oh, phooey. No, and hopefully folks listening to this can start adopting these practices before they experience some kind of crisis. And this is not to minimize like the impact of ACEs on people's lives. Like, no amount of breathing exercises is going to make an autoimmune disorder go away, but it's like we're going to work with what we can. And just like you said, it could, you experience improvement in just a month or two. Like, and some of these are very low cost, and it's just DIY, like, and, and it's worth a try, right? It's like, what have you got to lose? Maybe a few minutes each day, over a month or two until it starts to kick in.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like one of the things that like you said, you can't like minimize that the effects of trauma, and especially early childhood trauma too. I think one of the things I like to talk about too is like it took me lifestyle changes to be able to feel better. I did a lot of minimizing because I am like you were talking about like overachieving for sure. And so I think that that can often be seen as a trauma response as well for people who are, trying to do all of the things. That can be seen as a trauma response. And so, as a way to kind of work against that tendency, I really tried to minimize things that I was doing in order to take better care of myself and like to really provide that space to do so. Because I think that's one of the things. It's like that go, go, go mode is like you not wanting to really work through what you need to work through, right? And that, my husband and I are in the process of moving, and like we are like I am an extreme minimalist, and so it's like that kind of like same mentality, maybe not so much like Marie Kondo or anything like that, but like, just like trying to kind of like get down to what's, the bare minimum necessary. Look at your plate, like what's absolutely necessary to keep on it, and what are the things that you can say nope, not so much, like this is not necessary, like this is an added thing that is adding stress that I don't need. So like what can you take off your plate, I think is another great practice to do.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. This is, well, I wanna make sure I don't, gosh, I don't wanna cut you off because you have so many great ideas to share, but I wanna make sure we do, make sure people know how to follow up and how to, like, where to find your book, and how to stay connected. So, but do you have any more thoughts about the mind-body connection before we just share the contact info?
Yeah, for sure. So with the mind body connection for educators, it is really, obviously the audience is educators, but it can be picked up by anybody and be useful to understanding, how our brain works and how trauma and prolonged stress can really be internalized and can cause us issues later on in life. So I think the practices in here are really helpful in order to mitigate that, and also just give you the information that you need to support not only yourself but also your kiddos, and your family members and your colleagues at work. Just really useful information there. And we'll be doing some additional work with membership at Wellness for Educators, so there's an opportunity to join there, and maybe doing some book study work as well around that book. And we have micro courses and webinars, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, really looking forward to continuing this collaboration with your team, Inga. And thank you so much for inviting me to talk with your community today.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the plan is that this would be the first of a series of 4 books, right? So this is the first one.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So the series of 4 books, the idea came out of the fact that, like, after writing that first book, it was like everything in there is more about, like, the intentional movement. But like I was mentioning during our talk today, um, the idea of creativity. So one of the books will be centered on mind-body connection via creativity. So looking at things like art and music and theater and dance and all of that good stuff, and how those can help support our healing processes. There's going to be a book about cultivating community as well, because one of the things that is really necessary to cultivating a foundation for learning is safety, but then the next thing is community and building relationships. So that idea of building relationships will be the third book, and the fourth book will be that system level or systemic level support, and how school leaders can really support that work within their learning and leading spaces.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, so I'm gonna close out with I'm gonna put the banners up on screen, but I'm gonna say them out loud for the folks who are just listening on the podcast. But so Wellness for Educators is the nonprofit that you and your team have set up and that is growing beyond what you imagined pre-pandemic because there's such a strong need for it. And online, it's WELL, the number 4, edu.org. So well4edu.org, and that's where folks they could find information on where to order the book. And you mentioned like book studies, micro courses, like things that are coming up. And then on social media, it's at well4edu. So WELL, the number 4 edu, and that's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the usual suspects, right? LinkedIn. Okay. Oh, and folks
Yes.
can reach you at well4edu@gmail.com, right?
Yep, either that or you can do Kathryn, Kathryn, at well4edu.org. And we're always interested in creating, we have a very much like a choose your own adventure type of approach to our programming. So anything that you need, we can put together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Kathryn, I'm so proud to have this blog post on our site, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and kind of bring this to life. And I really encourage folks like click through, read the blog post, find the podcast where Kathryn shares her story, and you've got links to great resources if anyone wants to read more about ACEs and these studies that show what educators are experiencing, and like you said, educators are going through this, but also parents and caregivers have experienced a lot of long-term stress, and we've all tried to push through it, and we can't just push through it forever. We have to slow down, address the trauma, and this mind-body connection is one of the paths out of that.
For sure. Thank you so much again, Inga.
Thank you, Kathryn. Okay, take care.
You too. Thanks.